Well, I want to express some degree of gratitude to our next speaker who, because of, he'll explain why he couldn't physically get here, Congressman Jamie Raskin. Congressman Raskin is a representative of the 8th District of Maryland to the House of Representatives. He is a chair of the Subcommittee on Civil Rights and Liberties, co-chair of the Congressional Free Thought Caucus. He's a former professor of constitutional law at American University's Washington College of Law. He led in the second impeachment trial of President Trump. And he is, of course, he's very active in the January 6th committee, but he's also really active in environmental issues. And so I was thinking about the fact that there is a physical environment that has to be protected. And there's also a social environment that has to be protected. And the guardrails of the protecting of our social environment are exactly what Mark Aronchek just pointed out, which is our system of checks and balances and the rule of law. Now, we know now that the same characters who are trying to make a mockery of the rule of law are similarly making a mockery of the law of nature that is largely funded by lobbyists who don't recognize environmental constraints. And that's just a strange phenomena, that they have an absolute arrogance toward the natural world, that we don't have to have environmental regulations addressing our addiction to fossil fuel. It's the same people. And I was just thinking of this kind of arrogance. For me, when Rudy Giuliani showed up at the Four Seasons Landscaping Company, it just, well, my dad was the producer of the Gong Show. And, and that was like a lighthearted parody of bad talent. But when the lawyer of the President of the United States outdoes the Gong Show, you've got to take things seriously. The rejection of the legitimacy of our legal system was evidenced on January 6th. This is where it can go. And that's why the testimony of Congressman Raskin is so important. And I've seen this, I've seen this, and I really hope we can get this session to the over 400,000 lawyers in the United States who need to be advocates for what is at stake with the rule of law. Would you roll the Congressman Raskin contribution?
It's Congressman Jamie Raskin from Maryland's beautiful 8th Congressional District. I'm calling out to all my friends at the American Bar Association in the International Law section. Thank you so much for inviting me to join the conversation about saving American democracy for ourselves and for the world. And I owe a special thanks to Lisa Savitt and to Nancy Stafford for making my invitation possible. And I want to also say hello to Mark Aronchek and Suzanne Spalding, the Right Honorable Kim Campbell and Jonathan Grainoff, who I know is moderating the panel. I'm sorry I can't be there with you. I know this is the first in-person annual meeting since 2019. Congratulations on that. On the other hand, it is not an in-person meeting for me, not because of COVID-19, but because of the January 6th Select Committee. And so my frustration with being in Congress is I suddenly get invited to go to all these amazing conferences and panel discussions all over the world, but I can't go to them because I'm just caught up in committees and subcommittees and floor action. But in any event, I have a great interest, obviously, in your topic today, and I don't want to bring excruciating boredom to everybody by talking for too long on Zoom, because I know that can be profoundly irritating. So I thought I would just make a few points about your topic, because I am immersed in the details of January 6th. And I wanted to give everybody a way of conceptualizing what the action was like on January 6th, and that might help frame and inform your discussion about what is the character of the threats to our democracy here in the U.S. and how does it relate to analogous threats or continuous threats to other countries, because I do believe that a democracy is under siege both in the U.S. and all over the world. The most extreme example, of course, is in Ukraine right now, where the sovereignty of the nation as an independent, liberal, democratic state has been violated by Russia, which is engaged in an illegal war of aggression against the Ukrainian people, and which is engaged in atrocities against the civilian population. On January 6th, I just want to encourage everybody to think about what happened that day as occurring in three rings of sedition. The outer ring was a mass demonstration called to be wild by the then president of the United States, Donald Trump. Tens of thousands of people responded to Trump's call for a wild protest, and undoubtedly there was a spectrum of different motivations and intentions on the part of people who showed up. Many were innocently motivated to come to stop the steal, according to the entreaty of the then president, and didn't have much clarity in mind about what was to take place. Others undoubtedly were spoiling for a fight after having participated in an escalating series of events to save American democracy from the stolen election that Donald Trump was trumpeting around the country. That mass demonstration became a violent mob, and the mob staged the worst riot in Washington, D.C. at the Capitol in American history. And the participants in the mob ended up joining violence that injured, wounded, and hospitalized more than 150 of our police officers, who ended up with broken jaws, broken noses, broken necks, broken shoulders, arms, legs, missing fingers, heart attacks, strokes, traumatic brain injuries, concussions, and in dozens of cases, post-traumatic stress disorder. I have multiple constituents still suffering today. One, an officer who goes to physical therapy twice a week, mental therapy once a week to this day because of the injuries that were inflicted by the mob on January 6th. Okay, that was the outer ring of the action and the most innocent ring of the action. The middle ring of sedition was the insurrection. And this was a working coalition of domestic violent extremist groups, white nationalist, racist groups that had come together for the premeditated purpose of smashing our windows, breaking our doors, attacking our federal officers, and essentially providing instruction to the mob as to how to do it, and then storming the Capitol and shutting down the counting of electoral college votes and interrupting the peaceful transfer of power in America for the first time in our history. Within this realm of the insurrection were to be found a whole bunch of different groups whose names I hope are familiar to you by now. The Proud Boys, who were told to stand back and stand by Donald Trump at the first presidential debate. The Oath Keepers and the Three Percenters, who have been indicted for seditious conspiracy, which means conspiracy to overthrow the government. The Ku Klux Klan, the Aryan Nations, the QAnon networks, which were out in force, various militia groups from around the country, the First Amendment Praetorian and assorted white Christian nationalist groups and religious cults who had gathered for this purpose. This was several thousand people. They had last tried to unite the right in this fashion back in August of 2017, if you recall the events of Charlottesville in that first summer of the Trump presidency, where Heather Heyer was killed and dozens of people were wounded when neo-Nazis descended upon Charlottesville, Virginia, and brought great wreckage and damage to that great city. When by the time they got to January 6th, 2021, their numbers had quadrupled or quintupled. So people understand the way that Donald Trump used these groups for his own strategic purposes, which certainly he did, but they used him too. And they've been able to build the muscle and the organizing efficiency and strategic coordination of their movement in a way they never contemplated before. What we saw on January 6th was really the birth of a mass fighting fascist street movement, thanks to the innermost ring of action on that day, because the insurrectionist wing itself was not the most dangerous ring of the action. It was the innermost ring, the ring of the coup. Now, the word coup is odd to employ in American political parlance because we don't have a lot of experience with coups, at least in our own country, and we don't think of a coup, or we do think of a coup as something that takes place against a president by, say, a runaway military faction. This was a coup, however, orchestrated by the president against the vice president and against the Congress and against the people of the country. Donald Trump did not accept, has never accepted, and was not prepared to accept his significant loss in the presidential election to Joe Biden, who beat him by 7.5 million votes and ended up with a margin of 306 to 232 in the Electoral College, which coincidentally, was the margin that Donald Trump beat Hillary by in 2016, a margin that Donald Trump quickly pronounced a landslide. So Biden beat Trump by the same landslide margin, 306 to 232, 7.5 million votes. And yet Trump, for weeks and weeks before the election, was running around the country saying the only way he could lose is if there is fraud. The only way he could lose is if there is corruption. And he refused to concede on election night. He said we were on our way to winning. In fact, we did win this election. They then brought forth more than 60 different lawsuits, which is lucky for us because we now have a comprehensive, meticulous record that Donald Trump had no valid claims of electoral fraud or corruption. What we have is more than 60 federal and state judges, including 8 appointed to the federal judiciary themselves by Donald Trump, refuting every allegation that he made. So that didn't stop it. I mean, in an ordinary democratic election, that would be the end of it. People think the election's been stolen, they go to court. They ask the court to sort it out. The courts did sort it out, and they said there was no problem. That didn't stop Donald Trump. Now he and his team tried to go to state legislatures, Republican-controlled legislatures, to get them to just void out the popular vote and install Trump electoral college slates. To their great credit, the unsung heroes of these Republican legislatures refused to do that. So then Trump and his team turned to trying to intimidate and browbeat election officials, most infamously Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger in Georgia. Trump called him up and said, just find me 11,780 votes. That's all I want. Well, I'm in politics. That's all I want, 11,780 votes. That was the president of the United States, not trying to stop voter fraud. That was the president of the United States trying to commit voter fraud, commit election fraud, and being caught red-handed. And there were multiple other cases of those same kinds of overtures going to election officials. Again, a group of unsung heroes who not only braved direct intimidation by the President of the United States, but also ended up braving and surviving violent death threats that followed after Donald Trump turned the wrath of his social media machine against these people for refusing to buckle under to his will. Well, there were some other attempts to steal the election along the way, but it all came down to January 6th. And the idea here was they would just get Vice President Mike Pence to declare unprecedented, unwritten, extra-constitutional, lawless powers to unilaterally reject and rebuff and repudiate electoral college votes coming in from the state. So in other words, they were telling Vice President Pence, just declare that you've got the power to nullify the votes of tens of millions of people in Arizona, in Georgia, in Pennsylvania. And then what we will be able to do is lower Joe Biden's vote total from 306 in the Electoral College to below 270. And having done that, according to this plan, the contest would have been kicked immediately into a so-called contingent election in the House of Representatives under the 12th Amendment. And why did Donald Trump and Steve Bannon and Roger Stone and the gang want the election decided in Nancy Pelosi's House of Representatives with a Democratic majority? Well, they knew that under the 12th Amendment, we're not voting one member, one vote. We're voting one state, one vote. And they have 27 states after the 2020 elections. The Democrats, we have 22. One state, Pennsylvania, is split down the middle, 9-9. So even if one state, Wyoming, defected from the GOP majority because Liz Cheney decided not to go along with this farce, still they would have had 26 states to 23 or 22 to 2. It would have ended up that way. And at that moment, they were prepared to declare that Donald Trump was the winner, seize the presidency, declare martial law by invoking the Insurrection Act, as Donald Trump's disgraced former national security advisor was urging him to do, call in the National Guard to put down the insurrectionary chaos he had unleashed against us, blaming Antifa for it all. And we would have entered a very different kind of government here. So it was only Mike Pence's refusal to go along with the idea of him stepping outside of the constitutional order and the bravery of these officers who saved us from being overrun and members of Congress from being killed that day, that prevented us from seeing not just a violent insurrection, which succeeded in interrupting the peaceful transfer of power, and not just an unsuccessful coup, but a successful coup. We would have seen a successful coup. And at that point, anything could have happened: martial law, outbreak of mass violence, civil war, who knows where it would have gone. So that's the story that we are preparing to tell America in June of this year in hearings and in a report that we put out. We understand this takes place in a totally global context, from Moscow to Mar-a-Lago. All the dictators and the bullies and the tyrants and the despots have found each other. Orban in Hungary, along with Putin in Russia. Duterte in the Philippines, along with El-Sisi in Egypt. The homicidal crown prince of Saudi Arabia, President Xi, Bolsonaro in Brazil, you name it. All of them rooting on the destruction of democracy in America in the hopes that that means the obliteration of democracy around the world. So the topic of your panel discussion here could not be more important and could not be more urgent. And if I don't get a chance to watch it as it takes place, I will definitely make sure I get to go back and watch it. I thank you for allowing me to contribute a few thoughts, and I'm urging everybody to hang tough for democracy, the Constitution, and the rule of law all over the world. Thank you very much.